plenty to talk about on today's program, so let's bring in our guests. We are joined today from Ramallah by Nasser Abdul Karim, financial economist and former advisor to the UN and the World Bank. From Jerusalem, Avraham Bורg, former chairman of the Knesset and chairman of Molad, a political think tank. And also in Jerusalem, we're joined by Diין, former chairman of the Yesha Council of Jewish Settlements and a political activist. Danny, let's start with you. Is Israel right to be concerned, so concerned about this BDS movement?
Well, I wouldn't say that the BDS movement is that what should concern us. I think that we should be concerned by the behavior of some European governments and by the EU itself, led in this case by Baroness Ashton. Those fringe elements that advocate, in fact, the destruction of Israel, the BDS movement, that's not to bother us. But yes, I take issue with the behavior of some European governments of the EU that, as a matter of fact, that starting to use economic coercion as a means to determine the outcome of the negotiations between Israeli and Palestinians, and that is a reprehensible thing.
Avraham Bורg, the BDS movement does appear to be gaining traction now. Do you agree that Israel should be concerned about its move into the mainstream, even if it's only just beginning to do so? Is Israel being unofficially sanctioned here?
I'll make a distinction between two kinds of policies. The BDS movement, which is a Palestinian expression, and the European or international community. As for the local Palestinian one, which are for almost 5 decades under the Israeli occupation with no real democratic rights, with no civil rights, and no real liberties, and no actually rights for self-determination, I ask myself, as a Palestinian, so to say, what is actually the best action called for? Violence is not kosher. Violence is not legitimate neither in the eyes of the international community, nor should it be legitimate in the eyes of the Palestinians. Political expression is not allowed because Israel wants to current Israel wants to continue its occupation. So it looks like that the BDS is a legitimate civil disobedience and legitimate non-violence policy, which the Palestinians are right to take. I don't like it personally because I'm a dialogist, but I understand the Palestinian position. As for the international community, it's a different thing entirely. Here it is not so much about the economic measures as much as telling Israel, listen, the situation in the occupied territories is temporarily for 50 years almost now, since 67. How long do you think can we tolerate amongst us, amongst the West, the Western civilization and the democratic hemisphere, the only country amongst us which is still colonial and still occupier? Not for long. And therefore it's a moral statement saying sanctions are being implemented on elements which are not dialogist. If Israel does not want to have a conversation and reconciliation and a dialogue with the Palestinians, you cannot find yourself amongst us as a legitimate member, and therefore it's a moral statement more than just an economic one.
Diין, the BDS movement doesn't pose an existential threat to Israel, does it? It's more of a challenge to Israel's oppression of the Palestinian people.
Of course not. Israel has 4 major trade partners: North America, Western Europe, Eastern Europe, and the Far East. And right now, some elements in one of them, in Western Europe, are threatening with economic sanctions. But we have to make it very clear, it's not a boycott. As a matter of fact, it's an attempt to extortion against Israel. Why? Because a boycott is when you take economic measures based on moral standards. But this time, it's not based on moral standards. It's based on political interests. And I want to prove that. If it were for moral reasons, then I would expect the Europeans also to threat with boycotts and sanctions the Palestinian Authority that just a few days ago, a few weeks ago, its chairman, its president, gave a hero's welcome to convicted murderers that were released from Israeli prison at their demand. So we see that they have no problem with terrorists, but suddenly they have problems with construction of houses. When in the same day, Prime Minister Netanyahu announces the construction of new houses for families, and Chairman Abbas, President Abbas, kisses and hugs convicted terrorists, and the European Union, the European governments only condemn one, and the wrong one, Prime Minister Netanyahu, then it's very clear that we are talking about very cynical political interests here, nothing to do with moral values.
Okay, I'll bring in Nasser Abdul Karim in just a moment, but I think that Avraham Börg wants to respond to that.
Let's look, Dayan is the most eloquent speaker for the settlements movement. Nobody is better, more articulated than him. But then the question is not, can Dani Dayan badmouth and paint in black colors all the Palestinians' movements and policies. The question is very simple. What an arch settler like Mr. Dayan has in mind do not have any political rights under the occupation of Israel? Can he continue to claim that Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East as far as it comes to Jews? And what does that mean for the non-Jews, especially to the occupied Palestinians? Give me an alternative program for the Palestinian people, and don't tell me how bad they are. Tell me how good you are. Tell me what is your policy. Tell me what is your solution.
All right, let's let Mr. Dayan respond very briefly, if you would, please, because I want to bring in Mr. Abdul Karim.
Well, I will say very briefly, first of all, thank for the praise of Mr. Börg, but it seems that Mr. Börg was busy moving to the fringes of the Israeli society and the political scene and didn't notice that just a few years ago, our Prime Minister, Ehud Olmert, gave the most far-reaching peace offer to President Mahmoud Abbas, and President Abbas rejected it, in fact.
Nasser Abdul Karim in Ramallah, is a boycott of goods at Israel the most effective and moral way to influence Israeli policy, do you think?
I think no matter will argue or dispute the fact that boycotting products from settlements will hurt definitely and significantly the economy of Israel, as well as the viability of settlements activities. So we as Palestinians, what we care for is not to hurt the Israeli people. We care to make the cost of living in the occupied Palestinian territories so high for Israeli settlers, and to let them feel that this is not a heaven. They have to pay the price, so they will think it wise to come and settle in this area. So we need to end occupation. And as a matter of fact, even the boycott in the Palestinian territories, not many people support the boycott of Israeli products manufactured in Tel Aviv or in Jaffa or Akka. As a matter of fact, we import more than $3.5 billion from Israel in goods and services. But we are pro-boycotting Israeli products that manufactured in the settlement. So this is the position of the Palestinians.
Okay, let's just put this into context for a moment. The West Bank is split into different zones depending on how much control Israel exercises. Area C is under total Israeli control. According to a government report, there are 600 Israeli-owned factories in the West Bank. Each year, they generate $250 million worth of exports. Now, that only accounts for 0.55% of the national total. But severe restrictions placed upon the Palestinians in the West Bank is estimated to cost their economy more than $3 billion. The fact remains, much of Area C is considered illegally occupied by much of the international community. Nasser Abdul Karim, under international law, as we were saying, Israeli settlements on occupied land are illegal. Does that mean that products produced for export in factories on that land are also illegal? What are the implications of that?
I think yes, the EU decision to boycott the products of settlements is very clear. It's based on international law, on international resolutions and conventions. Settlement activities are all illegal in principle. So whatever they produce, whatever they generate, whatever they do, it's illegal. So settlements must end. And this is Palestinian land. As you said, The World Bank report, not the Palestinian report, estimated that for Palestinians not being able to use Area C, that cost us around $3.4 billion a year. You have from 1994, then you have to count 18 or 20 years. So we are talking about a loss of more than $100 billion from that prevention. So what we are after is not getting into struggle again with Israel. We are after reaching a peaceful but just and lasting solution with Israel and live side by side in two-state solution. That's the negotiation all after.
Diyan, the BDS campaign calls for full equality in law for Palestinian Israeli citizens. Now, without wishing to hijack our discussion and take it into a whole new area here, is it possible for you to explain, in your view, succinctly, why that's a problem?
No, it's not a problem because it exists, so it isn't a problem. That proves that the whole BDS movement uses excuse in order to delegitimize Israel, because that very goal exists. I looked very carefully at the American Studies Association decision and the FAQ page, the frequently asked questions, to explain it, that I noticed that they do not even not name once the Ariel University, and there are complaints that against Tel Aviv University, Haifa University, the University in Jerusalem, etc., namely against the existence of the State of Israel. But let's put aside, returning to economics for a second, the assessments. You know, assessments, speculations about numbers, everyone can give an assessment. The fact is that this day, this very moment as we talk now from Jerusalem and Ramallah, 25,000 Palestinians thrive and are employed with higher salaries than in the Palestinian Authority, in Israeli films in Judea and Samaria, bringing a contribution of 300 million euros to the Palestinian Authority GDP. 300 million euros to the Palestinian Authority GDP. This is the fact. As a matter of fact, the industrial parks in Mishor Adumim and in Barkan and other places in which, as I say again, 25,000 Palestinians find their work, are the places of the best existing coexistence in the world between Jews and Palestinians. If you want to ruin that, then you are hindering peace, not contributing to it in no way.
Avraham, we'll come back to you in just a moment, but first I know that Nasser Abdul Karim wants to respond to that.
Yeah, I wouldn't argue with the gentleman from Tel Aviv about the economic ties between some Palestinians, especially low-skilled laborers, and settlements. We have 35,000 persons working in settlements, and we do have some trade with those settlements. That's because it's a de facto, not because the Palestinians desire to do so. And after all, from the cost-benefit analysis and perspective, from the Palestinians' perspective, the economic cost to Palestinians whenever the settlements end and dissolute is lower than any political benefit that we are looking for. We are after ending occupation, and we don't think that we will trade off settlements, activities and occupation with economic prosperity. This is the economic piece of Netanyahu, and I don't think any Palestinian would accept that. We would accept live as neighbors with Israel. We will continue economic relations once we have a state and on equal footing. And then I don't think that any Palestinian would probably disagree with continuing economic cooperation with any country in the world, including Israel. But we need to be free first to decide on our options and policies.
All right, the BDS doesn't just promote an economic boycott. Its activists describe their approach as a non-violent means of resistance. Its three-pronged approach includes the boycott of products and companies they say profit from the violation of Palestinian rights, but it also lobbies against cultural and academic institutions they say contribute to or defend the oppression of Palestinians. Last year, renowned physicist Stephen Hawking joined the academic boycott, and major entertainers like Elvis Costello and Bono have cancelled plans to perform in Israel. But more than that, BDS wants to create a critical image of Israel, an idea inspired by the anti-apartheid movements in the 80s in South Africa. Avraham Bורג, I think we've tried to establish here that perhaps the economic effects of the BDS campaign here are, at the moment, for the least, minimal. So Israel perhaps is more concerned about the negative impact that the movement is having on public opinion worldwide. Is it hurting brand Israel?
You know, you ask me practical questions and we speak here about numbers, and I don't think the issue is neither about numbers nor about measures of damage, etc. It's about principles. If the conversation is the old talk of interests, what is the interest of Israel? To have larger land, let's never mind what is the international prize, let's give some better salaries for 25,000 people, as Mr. דיין is saying, and occupy the rest of the land. So in this conversation I'm not really interested, but I believe that the international and the local discourse moved from the conversation of interest to the conversation of values. Do I, as an Israeli, want to live in a country which has a one-state regime between the Jordan and the Mediterranean, in which half of the population, the Jews, ethnically speaking, are enjoying, like myself and my children and my family, a full comprehensive democratic reality, and the other part of the population are having no democracy at all, no rights at all, none whatsoever constitutional shields and safety nets. This is a bad moral situation for any country. And therefore, for me, the principle is not necessarily how to measure the damage or how to measure the benefit, but how to do the right thing. And the right thing is, A, that between the Jordan and the Mediterranean, every individual will have the rights to have the same rights, and every collective will have the rights for the same self-definition and determination. If the Israelis or the Jews among the Israeli society would like to define themselves in this kind of a collective definition called the State of Israel, let the Palestinians define themselves in a collective definition which is called the State of Palestine, an independent, sovereign, equal, leveled with the one of Israel. Then let them decide for themselves how to work, how to employ, how to pay taxes, how to defend themselves. Not Dani Dayan, A, to negate their right to have a state, and then to decide how much you pay them for that.
Dani Dayan, Israel then perhaps should be worrying less about its image abroad, the PR battle, and should look to try to fix what we just heard described there as a bad moral situation.
Well, as a matter of fact, Israel is incessantly trying to achieve peace with the Palestinians, but unfortunately that's unsuccessful because of the Palestinian intransigence. The so-called settlements, the Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria are not and never were an impediment for peace. On the contrary, they are a boost for coexistence. But as we see, for instance, the Palestinian Authority, the PLO, refusing adamantly to resettle the refugees, the so-called refugees, the fifth generation of the original refugees, in the places in which they reside, in order to use them as a bargaining chip, in order to coerce Israel to strip itself from its character as a Jewish state. Its adamant refusal to recognize Israel as a Jewish state, not as a matter of fact, not just to recognize Israel as a Jewish state, as a matter of fact to recognize the very existence of the Jewish nation, to consider Jews just a religion. So the self-flagellation that Mr. Bורg now I cannot accept it. The reason that the Palestinian state does not exist is only one, the Palestinian intransigence.
Okay, I'm afraid, Avraham Bורg, I don't think you're going to get the time to reply, because I've got to throw it one more time back to Nasser Abdul Karim in Ramallah before we end the program. I just want to ask you, Mr. Abdul Karim, whether you think perhaps a boycott of goods from Israel and the occupied territories could actually backfire. Is it the best way, you think, to process? Could it have a negative impact? Could Palestinians suffer as a result of it? They might lose their jobs if the currency takes a downturn, if the general Israeli economy is affected.
If I understand you correctly, I think that Israel should think not just of the economic impact. I think Israel should also look into the long-term probably prospects. If Israel enters into a lasting peace agreements with Palestinians, then that will give the Israelis a very good chance to integrate in the Mediterranean economies and even Arab and Muslim economies. And after all, the Palestinians are not against Jews. The Palestinians are against occupying power of Israel. So we respect Jews in their religion, and we have learned to exist with them, coexist with them, even before the existence of the Israeli state in 1948. And I think just one last statement: Israeli taxpayers in Tel Aviv and inside Israel itself should think that they are financing and leveraging the settlement activities with no actual benefits on the long run to the Israeli state at all. It will harm them.
Gentlemen, I'm afraid we are out of time. As always, the news waits for Oman. That's next here on Al Jazeera. Thank you to all of you, Nasser Abdul Karim, Avraham Bורג, and Diane. And thank you very much indeed for being with us for this edition of Inside Story. If you want to send